Hey guys, what is going on? Brother Gesh here. Today we're going to talk about the technical and fine details of setting up the stream. So in the first video, I really just kind of glossed over a lot of the simple details of looking at OBS, you know, what each panel does. But I didn't really go into detail about all the specific settings, particularly the advanced ones. So this video is definitely going to be pretty in-depth and meaty. Hopefully it'll give you make you a little more comfortable with setting up the stream and fine-tuning it to your preferences. So I'm going to just open up OBS here. I also have OBS open on another screen, which interestingly enough, I'm going to have to probably pull over my recording one to show you a few things. So let's go ahead and go into settings. And we're just going to go ahead and click advanced. So I think I mentioned this in the first video, but for your process priority, you're going to want to leave this on either high to above normal. This just allows your computer to fund more resources to OBS and helps it to transcode the pixels more efficiently, and it gives it more resources to function more efficiently. Sometimes, even if you're playing like a simple game that doesn't really take up a lot of bit rate, but you're still finding that OBS is not functioning well, it could be that you're not feeding it enough resources. So again, I would either leave this on above normal or high, especially while you're streaming. When you get to video here, you'll have a renderer, which in OBS, I think there's 11. Hopefully they'll have Direct 12 soon, which that runs really nice in a lot of newer video games. Color format it's on NV12 by default. I would leave this as is. The other ones I believe aren't as reliable. Color space. This kind of is just like the color palette it has to work with. It really isn't a big deal if you use 709 over 601. 709 just gives it more color to work with. And same thing with color range. You could just do full range with 709 if you want the most color to get out of your display. If you are recording in any format other than MP4, you can automatically remux your recording after the stream. You can also manually do it though if you don't want to do it through the program. I find that even though sometimes I record in other formats, the recordings can still be corrupted. So I usually just tend to record in MP4. But again, you have this option here if you want to do that. You can also set up a stream delay. This is great, you know, obviously if you don't want people to stream snipe you while you're trying to play a game that requires, you know, you to look at the map and where you are. Alternatively though, you could also just have a screen to cover up your game while you're playing, so you know, you're kind of your own preference. You can have OBS try to reconnect to your stream if it does disconnect for whatever reason. I know Twitch has a screen it will throw up when you are having issues and until you can get things figured out on your end, but having this enabled is usually a good thing. And then network. This is kind of pretty much just fine-tuning your internet connection within OBS. Bind to IP is pretty much telling OBS like what network connection is being utilized. I would just leave this on default unless you have a specific Ethernet connection you know you're using. These options right here are all really nice. Low latency mode will allow your chat to be in low latency. I think Twitch has that feature in there as well, but it just hardwires it into OBS. So if you like being able to chat with your audience in real time, this is a good option to have. It may or may not put some strain on your connection, but I really haven't noticed a significant difference. Enabling new network code, I would leave this checked. This just allows you to have better algorithms whenever you're streaming. And then this dynamic feature, it's still kind of new, but I really like it. Pretty much it will adjust your bit rate for you while you're streaming. If you run into issues with your internet being slow or like there's an issue with the server, and it'll adjust it to make it so your stream stays smooth and not dropping any frames. Then you have sources. this I would just leave unchecked. All this really does, I think, is if you have things like alert boxes and widgets and things that use browser sources, it gives resources to those so they are, I guess, more efficient and are working. But really, you can just refresh it most of the time and it works fine. And this just takes away resources from OBS, in my opinion. So with that being said, let us go to output. So again, I didn't really touch on this much in the first video, but here you're going to determine, you know, what encoder are you going to use for your stream. Pretty much, you're telling the OBS what your graphics or your CPU, which one of these do you want to transcode all the information you're streaming to whatever you're streaming on. It's really going to depend though on your computer specs. If you've got a great graphic card, I would suggest the new Inventic encoder if you have NVIDIA. If you have a good CPU processor, I would go with X264. There are a lot of guides online and forums talking about what would work best, but ideally, you're going to want to use whatever is stronger. And let's say we'll kind of just touch on both real quick. So I have an NVIDIA card. So let's say we go with NVIDIA, right? Pretty much you don't really change much other than the normal settings in here. I find the quality of this versus X624 to be pretty similar if you're going for high quality. I would say with X264, the preset is like the quality level versus NVIDIA's preset quality. So you could do a max quality on NVIDIA, right? And it will pretty much match up to about fast to medium on X264. And X264, some people think it looks cleaner, but in my opinion, I feel like it throttles your computer too much and can actually cause performance issues with games, unless you're doing something like faster to very fast, which is kind of like the standard for most people. If they've got like a modern CPU and they want to stream at 720p, like very fast to faster is the way to go. If you're trying to do more intense of options, like maybe 900p to 1080p, and you've got like a nice CPU processor, you could try fast to medium. Usually anything after medium tends to just have loss on returns, so you don't really want to go anything past this. But you'll probably want to monitor your computer temperatures while you're doing this, because again, like running it on medium to fast can cause your computer to get pretty hot. And you'll notice that if it gets too hot, you'll start having like performance issues in your game. You know, frames are dropping in your game, not necessarily in OBS, which can obviously make playing a game difficult. Here, I'm gonna just show you real quick. I've got a lot of tabs open because I've got a lot of tabs to show you. But SpeedFan is a great free program you can download. It's been around since freaking forever. But all you really need to do is you go and download. Let's see, where's the most recent one? Where is it? Is this it? No, oh no, download. Yeah, so you go to download, download the latest version here. Once you download it, it's going to look like this. Here, let's pull it up real quick. Pull it over here. Yeah, my screen blacked out for a minute. It's gonna turn on everything. So just a little quick preview. It's pretty simple to use. This box won't be checked when you first open it. You just click it. What this does is it can mess with the speed of fans in your computer to speed it up to give you more fan control, and helps improve cooling in your computer if you need it. And it also helps read all your temperatures. You can also turn up the percentage of how much you want your fans to operate. Like your system fan, your CPU fan, any auxiliary fans you have. And you can actually, if you're technical with it, you can go into the BIOS settings and actually adjust, you know, like when do you want the fans to turn on, and should they be running like at full power always, or only when you're having performance increases, things like that. This first screen is really the only screen you're going to need. The rest of the stuff is like if you like are wanting to overclock and all that fancy stuff. But again, if you just want to see your computer temperatures, this is all you really need. You can minimize it. It's still working in the background, but again, you know, if you're streaming and you want to know how it's doing in real time, I would just always have it open on like a second monitor or something. So back to the output settings. So again, let's go back to Invenic. I'm kind of jumping around here, but this is going to kind of cover X6242 for the most part. So again, rate control. For streaming, I would leave on CBR. That's kind of the standard for most streaming rates. All the other ones really aren't configured too well yet. And then bitrate, we'll talk about a little later in the video when we start talking about internet settings. And then next we have keyframe interval. So 0 it's set to auto. This pretty much kind of helps set like a bit of a delay in transcoding things, so it helps your OBS catch up. It won't necessarily cause like a change in the quality of the stream. It's more of like an internal thing that helps OBS keep up with everything, and most of the times they're going to recommend you have it set to 2. That kind of helps. You know, it keeps the stream looking smooth and also doesn't put too much load on OBS, so it gives it time to catch up. Quality presets, you know, you can go for max quality, you can go for max performance. You know, really, you're gonna want to do a few test streams just to see like what runs best and also what looks best. You can also set it for low latency performance, but I mean, if you already have low latency checked anyway, you probably don't need to check that. Profile, you have high, main, and baseline in Invenic. You pretty much could do main or high. High might give you a little bit of a better quality. Look ahead, let me see if I can click the box here. So this enables what's known as dynamic B-frames. B-frames are like those pretty much the little the juicy encoders in your NVIDIA card that will allow for making like graphics look nice when you stream. Most of the time they're going to recommend you have 2 B-frames enabled. You can have more, but most streaming presets say 2 is best for you know, getting that good quality but also not overusing it. GPU, right here it just says 0, so if you have multiple GPUs you can determine which one you want to use for streaming. Psychovisual tuning, this kind of amplifies the quality of your B-frames. And it also amplifies bitrate optimization. So this will increase your visual quality, just makes your GPU work a little harder. If you've got a pretty good GPU card, like probably at least like in the 10 series, you probably could have this on and be fine. Again, a lot of these settings really won't impact your performance too much. It's really going to depend on the resolution and bitrate you're streaming at that will mostly affect it. So going to X264, again, most of these settings I already talked about are the same, with the exception of the CPU usage preset, which is like the quality preset in Invenic, and then profile, again, like in Invenic, the same thing. Tune, you could pretty much leave this alone. I think this adds like filters, but you don't really need a filter on the screen for this. And then if you want to add like any extra options in X264, like if you wanted to add B-frames, you could add B-frames. I think the command's like B-frames equal and then whatever you want. So again, I would just play around with both of these. If you want to like test and see how each one looks, you could pretty much go into recording and then record it as if you were going to stream it. So you could like set your encoder, set the bitrate you would stream at, not record at, and then, you know, the settings you would have while streaming. So, you know, if you do Invenic, you can do that. If you do X624, you can change that here. I would, as far as streaming goes, I would never rescale the output. I would let that be determined by your video settings, which we'll get to that shortly. Because again, that can cause, I guess, it's not as reliable versus just letting the video settings handle everything, and you can have inconsistencies with maintaining your stream and drop frames and whatnot. So that pretty much covers the output. If you go to audio, you'll notice all your tracks have bit rates. 160 is the cap for most platforms, so I wouldn't even go above that. Replay buffer, if you want to have like a buffer enabled while you're recording, it can help buffer that recording if you have stuttering for whatever reason. Let's see, what else? Is there anything else to talk about here? I think that covers that. So let's hop into video, because output and video tend to go hand in hand. So video, when you hop in here, you will have a few settings. You have the base resolution, which is whatever your monitor is set to. I would leave this as is. Unless you want your actual resolution to look like it's a freaking shrunken image, I would leave this. But your output resolution is what's going to be what you stream. So you'll see here you have several options. You have like 1080, you have 810, 720, 480. Some resolutions in here aren't shown in here. Like, for example, if you wanted to do 1600 by 900, you would just manually type that in. So you just go 1600 x 900 and it'll configure it, right? So, but again, I'm going to suggest for most new streamers, 720p is probably the best resolution for you. And when we get to internet, I'll explain that more in depth. You have your downscale filter, which kind of helps clear and kind of make certain images and what am I looking for? Graphics and stuff look sharper. If you go to sharpen scaling and Lancosos, it really doesn't add too much of a strain on your computer, so most of the time you probably want to go with this. If for some reason it is an issue, you could try bicubic, but again, most people would probably go with Lancos. And then your frame rate. So this is pretty important too, obviously. You know, if you wanted to stream at 60 frames, keep in mind that's going to put a lot more strain on your internet and computer versus just doing 30 frames. A lot of people will suggest, if you like doing 1080p streams but struggle with a lot of things, 30p is a good frame rate to have. 720p, however, you could probably get by with doing 60 frames. Another interesting little trick I've noticed is, like, some games are can be very graphically intensive, and running it consistently on 60 frames, streaming it can be hard. So the 59.94 is pretty much like 60, but it's like, you know, like a hundredth or a tenth less performance. But really, you would hardly notice the difference. And amazingly enough, like it sometimes it helps me play games that seem impossible to have at 60 frames, but it runs amazing on 59.94. So just something to consider if you're wanting to do 60 but have an issue with it for whatever reason. So again, I would just test it out. Start with 720p, obviously, but you can always do a lot of test streams and test recordings just to see what looks and runs the best. So let's see. I think we've talked about video settings. Yep. So next, let's talk about the actual displays and like actually capturing things. So when you're wanting to capture a game, you're going to have three methods ideally. You're going to have a game capture. You're going to have a window capture, and then you're going to have a video capture device. And we'll talk about display capture as well, but the first three I mentioned are pretty much going to be your main game capturing windows. So let's start with game capture. This one pretty much will work most of the time with most full screen games, but you can also toggle it to capture a specific window, or if you want a hotkey and tap in and out of the game, you can do that as well. SLI crossfire capture method, I think this is mostly utilized in like AMD cards. If you're having frame rate issues, like this will help with some choppiness. Force scaling, again, I wouldn't bother with this. Your video setting pretty much already has a determined resolution, unless for some reason you want to like scale it to a smaller resolution or whatever. And then when you get below that, you'll have some of these settings like allow transparency. I believe will allow like other screens to be seen through the game. Like if you wanted to show your desktop or Steam, I think, but below it for whatever reason. Limit capture frame rate. So if you let's say you play on like a 120 frame or 144 frame monitor, but the game you're playing on or OBS is having a hard time being synchronized with the game because you're running it at a higher frame rate than what you're streaming. This will pretty much limit OBS to capturing it at whatever frame rate you have it assigned to. This can help with some choppiness and frame drops. Sometimes it can cause problems, so I would just kind of flick this on and off at your discretion. The other thing that usually helps when you're streaming a game at a higher frame rate versus what you're streaming, sometimes you might just have to enable VSync in your games. That can help kind of just like coordinate the frames between the monitor, your main monitor and OBS, and that can help reduce like a lot of like lag and screen tearing. Capture cursor. This will just show your cursor on the screen. Self-explanatory. Anti-cheat compatibility hook. So sometimes some games will have like anti-cheat programs built in, and this can cause capture problems with OBS. So by clicking this will kind of help disable that so OBS can show it. Now I will say though, sometimes if you leave this on, this can cause some capture problems. So you could even have this on, load up the game, then turn it off, and it'll work fine, and you might not have any issues versus just leaving it on. Then you have third-party overlays. You can like have your Steam overlay show up on your screen or whatever. If you have like like friends like adding you or like Discord messages, you can have that show up or not. Whatever you want. And then the hook rate, I just leave on normal. I think like this shows like how fast like things refresh on things that other like overlays that pop up on your screen. So to show this off, I will we're gonna open up a game that has full screen that will also allow me to show the OBS on top of that, because it's kind of hard to show it with my capturing one without like not being able to show you like how it looks on OBS. So we're gonna open up balloons. It's gonna go black. It's gonna go black for a minute. Then we can tab out, right, and pull up OBS. Should show it. Let me turn that off and make sure it shows it. There we go. See? And now it shows it. I think I turned off the anti-cheat compatibility hook. Still works though, doesn't matter. So this is again, like you should really just be able to open up the game, and if it's in full screen it should pop up like this, no problem, right? Again, sometimes though that might not work, and you might need to do like a specific window, which in this case you can just do balloons and it'll work there. You can also do the foreground option, which you have to set a hotkey for, but you can just press that hotkey and it'll show it and then take it away. Sometimes though, like if you switch to the full screen again, you just have to tab back into the game for it to load on OBS. Because you have to keep in mind, you have to feed it the image that it's showing, the full screen image, before it'll show it. So that is how you do it on a full screen game capture, right? So next, we're going to talk about the window capture. So window capture is nice if you have a game that doesn't really look great full screen, like maybe like either an emulator or a game that just it always opens up windowed, and you don't like full screening it. So this window capture pretty much works like how with the game capture you could select a specific window, but sometimes the windowed games don't show up well with game capture, so window capture is a nice alternative. So let's open up. Don't mind that. That's the Windows internal program. Let's open up RuneScape, right? RuneScape's a pretty windowed game. You normally wouldn't want to show this full screen because it gets stretched out, right? So we're going to go to window capture, go to properties, go to the window itself, look for RuneScape, and boom, shows up. Now again, you know, you can stretch it out a little bit, make it kind of look like this. You can also, if you have a border, you can like put a border around the game to make it look nice, and kind of tailor it to your image. So that's pretty much how window capture works. I don't think there's no fancy settings really, unless you have like, if you have like some issues with like the compatibility of like the display, you can sometimes do multi-adapter. Sometimes that fixes it. Sometimes it may not do anything, but again, window capture I like to use mostly for games that look good in windowed settings, obviously. So next, last but not least, is the video capture device. So for anyone that uses a console that wants to stream console games, this is what you would use. Now this one's a little tricky to show while I'm recording because the video capture device will not actually show if I have a second OBS open. It's only going to show on my primary OBS. So I'm going to have to show you what it looks like on the primary. So here's what we're going to do. I'm just going to show you my, come on over. There we go. We're going to show you what my recording OBS looks like. So I have a switch scene here, so we're going to go to that. And we're going to turn on my switch. I already have the Elgato setting enabled, which you can't see right now because my screen's dark. So let's add a display capture. So now you can see it. So you'll see I've got Elgato here, right? It's also known as the video capture device. So you add a video capture device, you name it whatever. These are going to be the properties you see when you open it up, right? So you're going to go to device, you're going to look for whatever your capture device is. I've got a Elgato, so we're going to click that. You can configure things. Can you see? Yeah, you can see it. Okay. You can configure things like the video decoder, like what format you're showing, you know, like brightness and color settings, you know, your audio input in there. You can also change things like the color space and the color range, like we talked about earlier. If you have buffering, like this kind of helps just the processor. OBS process the frames with automatic buffering. It doesn't really affect quality, so you just leave on auto detect. And then the audio settings, which we will talk about that shortly, because let me tell you, this is a bit of a nightmare sometimes. So now that you have your settings, we're going to now turn on OBS just so I can show you that it works. So we're going to turn on the Elgato. Turn on my switch. And then I'm going to pull over the Elgato. We're going to turn off my display. So you might see a green screen real quick. Nope. You see the switch right away. Okay. So that normally should be what shows it. If it's not showing for whatever reason, I always would make sure to double check the connections of your capture device. Make sure the output, I'm sorry, I got really close to the mic there. Make sure your output cable is going from the output to your monitor, and then the input would come from your console into the capture device. Because believe me, I've had a time figuring that out sometimes. But this pretty much is, you know, what you're seeing right here is pretty much what it's showing. And then the other, all right, Switch, don't go to sleep on me now. Come on. The other aspect with setting up video capture is the audio. So you should be able to hear it. Yeah, okay, cool. So when you're setting up audio for a video capture device, keep in mind it's not just pulling from your computer. You can't see it, hold on. Let me pull this up. Keep in mind that when you're setting up your video capture device, it doesn't pull from your desktop audio. So if I were to pull up, like, let's say, I'll show you. If I were to play a video, right? Let's pull up this. So you see here, the desktop audio is moving, right? Now, if you want to see, the Elgato, like, again, like, it won't be able to show it, but You see how like the Elgato here popped up here? So that lets you know that the Elgato is working, plus you should be able to hear it. Now the issue you'll find sometimes when you're setting up your audio is you'll notice that you might hear an echo, and that's because the Elgato audio will overlap with the desktop audio unless you know how to set it up properly. So what we'll do here is we'll go to Elgato. Actually, no, before we even get there, let me show you real quick what you do for your audio settings. So it's going to have capture audio only by default. You can try direct sound and wave out if this isn't working, but these tend to have weird audio noises that I prefer capture audio with. You're going to want to do your audio device, which, I mean, my capture card has one built into it, so I would pick this because you're going to want to take the audio from the capture device and use that. HDMI does have audio output, so that should suffice if you have an HDMI capture device. So once you have that selected, you know, that's going to be pulling your audio from there. Now, again, like I was saying earlier, the issue you'll run into is you'll hear it, but then like it like overlaps because it's pulling audio from Elgato, from the capture device, and it's also pulling it into your desktop audio, because keep in mind, everything is running, all the audio tracks are running through your desktop or your laptop audio. So you'll notice if you go to advanced settings and advanced audio settings here, you'll see all the different sources you have that may or may not use audio. So let's look at Elgato and let's look at desktop audio, okay? You'll notice that desktop audio has monitor off. So this means that we're not actively monitoring the audio, but we can still get audio input from it. So if you were to do monitor and output, you could pretty much take in the audio and also hear it being being sent out. I will say I'm not a wizard when it comes to audio setups, but if you're having issues with the overlap, you want to go to your Elgato and go to monitor only. So it's still going to take the audio, but it's not going to actually record the output from the Elgato. It's still going through the desktop audio though, so you can hear it through that. You'll notice here too on your tracks, you could alternatively just have different tracks set up. So if you were to swap to your Elgato, it would swap to the second track. But then you run into the issue of not being able to hear your desktop audio. So that's why I like leaving them on the same track. And with this way, you can still have the Elgato sound. It's just not going to overlap with the desktop audio. And you have the added feature of being able to adjust your console's volume. So let's see. I wish I could show. Let me see. Let me just show real quick the screen. You'll see the screen here. Let me just go into system settings so I can back out of it and see it. So you hear the little noise every time you go into system settings, right? So let's go into display capture again. So you see how the Elgato and the desktop audio are showing, but you know, it's not actually recording the Elgato. It's actually all going through the desktop audio. Now, if you wanted to make it softer or louder, you could go to the Elgato, right? And you can make it louder or softer. So check it out. So I'm going to make it really loud. You can make it softer. So that's one reason I like doing it like this. So that's pretty much how you would set it up with a capture device. I know it's a little messy, but you got to keep in mind that you're bringing in audio from a different source than just your computer. So the only other source I didn't talk about is the display capture, which, I mean, that one's like kind of an obvious one. You just hit display capture and boom, it shows your screen. But you can pick either display you're using. The only thing it won't show though is if you're using your active OBS with it on that screen, you'd have to drag it to the other screens for it to show that display. So that's why it's good to have just one monitor for all of your windows and OBS, and then the other one would be like your display monitor. You know, again, some people like having 3 monitors for that reason. I mean, you can do fine with 2 though. I mean, 2 is kind of almost like the minimum for like an optimal streaming experience.